Okay, guys, I think we can make a start. I think we're all accounted for. Um, I want to start by saying how amazing it is to have a panel as strong as we do. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving your time. Just for the audience, so you know, they have absolutely no idea what's coming. So if they have to take a minute to give a coherent answer, you know why. So yeah, so we've had great sessions up until now. We've looked at under the bonnet how AI works for simple-minded people. I think I just about got that. We've looked at regulatory models internationally, trends that we can see developing. We've looked more specifically at data protection, and we've looked at automated decision making in that space. And we've had a fascinating session about intellectual property rights, which really blew my mind. I think I held very simplistic positions, but Dr. Renz helped me there. And so now we come to this evening's topic, the responsible adoption of AI in business. And this is particularly relevant in South Africa, where our regulatory frameworks are perhaps a little bit lacking. And just to lead us in, I'm going to give each one of you an opportunity to give us an insight into what you think the word responsible in this context means. And so, in case you don't know, Dr. Brandt is has a master's degree in law and does a lot of public policy work. I think, Derek, if that's okay, and certainly works with us on the policy side for businesses, business rules, and the responsible use of AI. Retief, I've known for many years, actually, one of our best engineers, I think, in this area. CEO of Spatial Edge, where they build some cutting-edge AI technologies. And Willem, which I recently came to know in a roundabout way, which heads up the policy hub here at Stellenbosch University and does a few other very interesting things. So, gentlemen, if I may, in the order that you sit, let's start off by discussing what do you consider the word responsible to mean? Is it legal? Is it lawful? Is it safe? Is it ethical? Is it constitutional? Is it even worth pursuing it? Dirk, if you can kick us off, where do you think that lands us?
Thank you, Derek. I spend a lot of my time on this topic on responsible AI, and I think it is worthwhile to pursue that, because the technology itself requires us as society to think very clearly about how we engage with it. This technology brings us certainly a lot of benefits, but when we think about how it can impact and already impacted society, there are many questions about ethical concerns. And I would say one would start there, when you talk about responsible AI, to engage with the ethical issues. It becomes a legal question, certainly, because there's regulations, or there could be regulations dealing with AI as a technology, as a product, as a service. And therefore, there would be questions asked from a legal perspective as well to decide, but how do we deal with responsible AI in practice? And then lastly, I think one can have a wider angle approach to say, but from a society's perspective, what type of AI solutions are acceptable to be treated as responsible usage of AI, and what are those things that society cannot and should not tolerate? We've seen some of it being prohibited with the European Union's legislation, that's unacceptable AI. One glaring absence there, and which is highly debated also now in the last week or so at the United Nations, is the use of AI in warfare, lethal autonomous weapons, and other applications of AI. So then certainly questions about responsible use of AI comes to the front as well. But I would leave it at there for the moment.
Thank you. Over to you, Retief.
I'm going to have a very left field view on this, I assume. So I think being a commercial person, for us, the way we decide whether we get involved in a project or not is whether both sides of the transaction is going to receive value. So the provider of the AI and the receiver of the AI, are they both going to get value from whatever the thing does? So not looking ethically as whether it can do this thing or not, it's are they both going to get value? So one example is we were asked by someone from the gambling industry, can we apply something here? And I said, no, the house always wins. It's not a fair thing. This is not something that we do. So for me, it's that both parties, the provider of the technology and the consumer of technology gets value from it. And that it should be long-term sustainable value, so not just a short-term exploitation either. So it's in a commercial thing. Then another part of it, which is the technical side, is for us to deploy this technology in businesses. The responsible part is that it's actually going to work, that we're going to be able to track when it goes wrong, so that predominantly that business doesn't suffer financial loss. So it's more on the risk side. So we have to make sure if we're going to deploy these things that they're going to work. So we were just talking about, we've got one solution in the healthcare space. And if you look at the best of breed technologies today, they're a little bit over 50% accurate, which is problematic if it's your left knee and not your right knee. So we have to be responsible in making sure that if it's going to get applied, we have techniques and systems we can use to get it to a 95 or 100% or better than a human benchmark. So that's for me value, and it must work is for me the responsible.
Thank you. That's great. Willem.
Let me take another, I don't know whether it's left-ter field, it is, but I mean, let me take a philosophical starting point. So typically in philosophy, the conceptual counterpoint to responsibility is often viewed as freedom, the concept freedom. So if one looks at the regulation related to AI and the responsible AI discourse, it very quickly becomes a risk or identification and mitigation of risks, which is, I think, as Dirk said, extremely important. I think the big challenge, however, when it comes to AI regulation is asking the freedom question, which is often the innovation question. If you look at what the AI companies have to say on how they want to be regulated, certainly OpenAI, they focus on the notion of freedom. So if I may overinterpret your question a little bit, I think when we talk about responsible AI, very soon we end up with the question, how do we balance innovation, promotion, and risk mitigation? And to me, to a large extent, that's at the core of the conversation, and certainly also highlighted by the notion of responsibility.
So I'm not going to let you get away with that. I want a follow-on question. How good do you think in South Africa are we in terms of having a foundation, policies, laws, and the like to yield responsible use of AI? Where do you think we are there?
So many countries, also South Africa, have this approach where they say we need a mega AI policy or some sort of regulatory framework focused on AI. That's not exactly my view. My view is that AI, in many respects, touches on existing legislation, existing topics in legislation. If you think of privacy protection, if you think about combating discrimination and bias, that's things we already covered to a large extent in legislation. And my view is that the first question is which topics in existing legislation and policy making are implied by the AI systems in the massive variety, and should be strengthened or expanded a little bit. So in that sense, I think we have a relatively strong regulatory and policy framework that needs to be expanded a little bit. There are some topics, however, that I think are not yet covered and are extremely difficult to cover when it comes to regulating AI systems, specifically the newer breed of agentic AI systems based on reinforcement learning, I think are extremely difficult to regulate in South Africa and beyond, and many of the topics certainly related to the agency of these entities aren't contemplated in current legislation. There, I think our regulatory frameworks are weak, as are the frameworks in, I would say, all countries in the world.
I'm going to come back to you, Dirk. Apologies. Yeah, I was wanting to pivot to Dirk and ask adequate guardrails to manage responsible AI outcomes in South Africa today.
The short answer is no, I don't think so. We have some legislation, and as Willem indicated, we should explore how far the current legislation takes us. And if you look at the data protection legislation on personal information, we have one clause there dealing with automated decision making, and it's very limited in focus. So I think there is certainly a gap that we need to look at in properly regulating the development and use of AI. The issue of agentic AI is a more complex one, but I think there is certainly need to very specifically regulate for that, because that is something that will exponentially grow in usage. And if there is no regulation, there are certain harms that's very difficult to manage, dealing with privacy issues, with intellectual property issues, with transparency requirements that not properly accommodated anywhere. Having a principle of transparency in the Constitution for state administration, I think is simply too vague for us to simply read in the use of AI there.
Okay, so back to you, Retief. I see the social sciences and the engineering scientists starting to build up some heat and friction here. When you look at what is optimal in a almost transactional way, how do you balance projects that you take on? You said that certain projects you would simply not take on principle. Is that sort of something that's embedded in Spatial Edge? Is it something that you talk about, that you develop, that you purposefully pursue, or do you make the call at the end of the day what you take on and what you give a pass?
So fundamentally for Spatial Edge, if we engage with a client or we do a piece of work, we have to assess and determine whether we're going to deliver value for them at the onset. So whatever the problem might be, we want to quantify it in terms of return on investment for the client, and that should be something that's long-term and measurable, that makes things better. So that's for us the primary measure of whether it's worthwhile or not. And that's for commercial businesses. And that only works if they deliver value to the customer as well. So these two things, you can short-term exploit a customer by doing something like a price optimization, but that's going to last for a short amount of time, and then you've got to go back to a norm. So generally, if it's not something that's long-term sustainable, also you can't get a return on investment because it's still very expensive to build these systems. So if you're going to just use the technology to game the system for a short while, you're not going to get the return on investment for the things that you do. And that's done as well so far, and for the clients as well. That kind of keeps them also on things that really is going to make a difference long term.
Do you think it would be a pro-efficiency gain or help the market and bring more projects to your table if we had better guardrails for AI to render projects, to give more certainty as to what is an investable long-term project, or does it really not matter? Do you get clients that are cowboys, they want to build it, they don't mind taking a punt, because these things, as you say, are expensive to build, to train, to run. What's your feeling there? Do you sense the guys, your clients typically are risk averse in terms of possible changes in policy, or not so much?
So I think one thing that's quite core, if you roll this technology out in your business, it's fundamentally transformational to the business. That already comes with a lot of risk. So they have to make sure that whatever they do, they're going to take it, they're going to do it correctly, because a potentially better decision in one area is going to badly affect another area, and they've got to balance all of these things. So I think most of the clients we've definitely engaged with has approached it from a responsible angle. Obviously, there are people that don't do it responsibly, and you can see it by all the spam calls and things that you get and emails that you get. But I'm on the innovation, on the commercial, on the innovation side of things. I don't think the legislation is going to be able to adequately address those people. And it's not because you can't define good rules, it's because you almost can't enforce it. Because most of the companies, so the one that bothers me is spam, most of the companies that contact me is not in South Africa. So what does the law say about how do I chase them down? I'm just like, well, try your best. So it's for me not the rules, it's how is it actually going to be enforced to go after the people that's bad. And there, my view is they're going to sort themselves out. It's not that sustained value is not going to be there. They're going to be able to game the system for a bit, and then they're going to be out of business, and we're going to move. That's, to me, to some extent, self-regulating.
So, Willem, I believe that was a declaration of war. How do we respond?
To what exactly?
Let it play out, if I understand it. If it isn't value, those players, the market did not, market force figure out people bring solid value to the table, but policy frameworks and perhaps laws able to keep basic technology. Sorry, quoting you. Jump in again, but that is a dilemma of technology neutral in the hope that it gets better longevity. Is there such a thing? Or are you back to the position where you say, well, it's a hands-off approach?
I mean, I'm sure that Dirk will have a couple of interesting things to add here, but I mean, so I'm not this hardcore capitalist. I've not seen the invisible Adam Smith's invisible hand sorting stuff out automatically. I mean, that's not been the case in South Africa, certainly not globally. So there are other forces playing in that skews this ideal situation that you sketch here. And that's the first point. There's also a temporal dimension here. Of course, over the course of 1,000 years or a million years or a billion years, we won't exist anymore. Everything would have evened out. But the individual experience, the short-term experience, is much different. And I think that's partly the intention of policymakers. I think it's always reactive. We'll struggle to be ahead of the curve. Or policymaking will struggle to be ahead of the curve. But for the slightly more micro experience, over a slightly shorter time frame, I think that is where policy should come in, also to balance out or to address the mechanisms in the market, if I may use this word, that naturally skews this ideal effect that you sketch out here.
And in South Africa, where we have maybe a heightened prerogative due to inequalities in society, do we not, as a society, have a heightened burden to take a position that's maybe slightly less pro-innovation and more human-centric, if I may put it like that?
And that's an extremely difficult question to answer, because if we were to say that innovation is not pro-individual, pro-human, of course, yes, but the notion, I think that the type of innovation we need to foster is that type of innovation that benefits the poorest of the poor, etc. So I don't necessarily see that strict distinction between, let's say, innovation versus social outcomes. Yeah.
And if you look at the disruptive effect of the technology as it hits society, reshaping industries as a whole, even lawyers, can you believe, should the government not do more to manage the impact of that by, for instance, training people up, or I don't know what, so that we don't end in a world where all that is left is universal basic income? Surely there must be a better play.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's certainly something governments need to focus on, to capacitate, upskill, whatever the words are, people who might lose out. But there's also the imperative for governments, I think, to productively use AI in their systems to actually, within the context of limited resources, of limited human capacity, often within institutions, using AI to improve service delivery, which again would be a positive social outcome. So yes, the government policymakers as agents, then, if I may use this word again, to intervene, absolutely, but both also in how they use AI and then also how they sort of respond to the potential market effects of AI. Yes, so in agreement.
Can you unpack that a bit for me? I'm intrigued by how a government would use AI in policy making.
In policymaking and also in delivery of services. I mean, there are many government processes that are fundamentally automatable, where AI can do things much faster, much better than human beings. I'm thinking of identity document applications, passport applications, traffic license renewals. Those things you really don't need people. Those processes are supposed to be predictable and automatable. I mean, the benefits are clear and massive to individuals. Also, this new drive, the digital transformation roadmap was launched yesterday. When was it? The 12th of May by the minister, DCDT minister, where the government wants to focus on digital public infrastructure, where they say, and ultimately link it to AI, where they say digital means can make it easier for people to interact with government. We don't need physical ID books anymore, and also to transact with one another through universal payment interfaces. So all those things. If you look at policy making specifically, what policymakers need to deal with very often, they need to deal with words, a lot of words contained in research papers, contained in policies, contained in legislation. And the fantastic thing is that the newest brand of AIs, the large language model based AIs, are really great with you working with words, with navigating through a large volume of information. In that sense, I think the AIs are really supremely useful in the policymaking process. Collecting, synthesizing, making sense, and then ideally getting policymakers to use maybe a more higher quality combination of words as input into the policymaking process.
Thank you for that. I want to come back to you, Dirk. We have on our books a law that says when you're affected by automated decision making, you should have the right to be explained why perhaps an adverse ruling was made. I'm paraphrasing it. In other parts of the world, we say something similar. How effective do you think this is to give effect to constitutional rights? Do you think it's an effective thing to have or not? And then I'm going to ask you, Retief, after that, how do we even do that honestly?
I think it's a start. It's useful provision that's there to give individuals right to challenge decisions about profiling, but it's very limited in scope, and it is focused on those cases where the AI developed a profile and the decision is based on that profile, and you can challenge that. And we have some guidance with the European Court of Justice case recently about that, how to deal with it. But here, I think in taking that really to a larger scale in the AI space, you need the information regulator to be more capacitated and to be serious about dealing with AI and not only about privacy issues. And I think it is also necessary to expand on that provision to include a wider range of AI applications that impacts individuals in society. So it is a start as a tool, but it doesn't really cover many of the individual rights in the Bill of Rights. It's very focused and limited.
And as we've seen, the language is also easy to circumvent here and there. From a technical level, Retief, now we have these laws here and offshore that say if you're affected by an automated decision, you should have the right to understand how that decision was made. Now, looking at the little bit that I know of how these things work, it's a black box prediction machine that looks for patterns. I'm butchering that, but let's say it's a black box of data about data. Is it really possible to be able to go and say you did not get credit because of data point 1, 2, and 3? Or does that need to be architected into the thing from the start? Or are we lawyers looking at these acts and this legislation and we get goosebumps, but you think from a technical level it's a non-starter? So speak freely.
Let's not declare nuclear war. So I think there's a potential for a lot of fear because people don't understand it. So I think the first thing that someone needs to understand, profiling and how these decisions were made previously were rule-based. There were a set of rules that says if these things happen, this is what gets done. Those things are significantly more controversial than what goes into modern models, and therefore much more explainable as to why a decision was made. So in generally, I'm pro automated decision making because it definitely has the potential of being significantly better. Then it gets to the question of the black box. It should not be a black box because a business cannot risk decisions being made on their behalf that they don't know what's going to happen. So from a technical perspective, if we, and the tools today doesn't give that to you out of the box. So you have to architect it that way. But we can trace back every decision from which data set did it come from, with this timestamp of when, what were the parameters that went into the model, what binary of model were executed at the time. So we can go back exactly, we can go and run that decision and say, we can still get to the same decision point today based on that. Nothing is modified, so it hasn't been rigged or played with. And then we have to give an explanation of which parameters were used in the model because we need to track them over time to see, is it now making decisions based on different things. So in the solutions we built, and we've had to architect it that way, we know exactly what happened, why it happened. We regularly have to give responses on behalf of our clients to say, okay, how did we get to this? How did we get to this decision? So it's definitely, from a technical perspective, very capable. And I would argue much better than what you can get without.
That's it.
Sorry. Generally, then it's still people that's just playing around. So this is the scale of it is not significant. If you're dealing with 30 million customers and you're having 400 million interactions a day, which is what we do, you have to make sure these things are bulletproof, that you can say, well, how you got to every point. So technically, it's possible and it should be there. And that might be something that legislation can say, look, we require you to have this auditable track of what was done when.
Does that need to be known at the start when you build that tech, or can this be done after the fact? Or does it depend?
I think that's a maturity thing. So I think a lot of businesses trying to do it at this point. They don't have the people with the skills that can do that. Someone did a data science degree. They have some view of what modeling does and how it can predict. But in terms of infrastructure, security, that kind of auditability, that's not part of any curriculum anywhere. To find someone that can actually do it is quite rare. So it's not a given. It's not always possible to track back if you haven't done it in the past. So then it becomes difficult what the answer is going to be. But it's definitely, as a solution and environment matures, should and can get there.
Just a follow-on question. We spend a lot of time thinking about biases hidden in training data, right? So your tech ingests even court cases. Let's say it's a predictive sentencing machine. And if there were in the past racial biases, it would obviously take that in. It would see the pattern. How effective today can these models be tuned uh, to normalize that sort of thing? Do you take out that data point entirely? Do you have a gate at the end that checks? What are the approaches there to make sure that you're not perpetuating something?
I think that becomes a difficult thing because that's a societal thing more than just the technology. So I think that even though we try to eliminate biases, it's probably going to still be because of society. So I don't know what the right answer is. We do a lot of testing to make sure that there isn't statistical trends on bias when we produce our outputs, and if that gets picked up, trace it back to where it came from, and would typically remove that. But most of our model is based on an individual, so that's why I said there's not a race flag that was a rule before that says if you're in this category, they make a decision. It's on an individual basis that the decision is made typically, and your specific history with the business. So whether it's a credit or a promotion, it's based on your particular history with that business. So then it's biased on you, for you, against you. And I mean, then I don't know what I don't know what is right or wrong anymore. But generally, I would say it can be better than.
So, I mean, it could see I live in Welgevonden and it might think I enjoy traffic, which would be a bias and an incorrect one. I'm going to come to you, Willem. Do you think for certain high risk decisions, we need to enforce a person in the middle of that decision making process, even if it's suboptimal? Or is this paternalistic and a notion that we should let go?
I mean, my answer is yes, Your Honor. It's not that easy. So, but I had long conversations with AI people a while back, and the ethical thing was always the decision point should lie with a human being. But it's not that easy to know when the decision is actually being taken. So let me problematize it a little bit. But in principle, I would tend to agree that in high risk decision-making settings where there's a lot at stake, a human being should make, an accountable human being should make that decision. Because for me, that's maybe the part of the ethical thing. To whom is the machine accountable? So you would say the company that deploys it's accountable, the developer, whoever else. It becomes quite murky, whereas in that case, human beings are best at being held accountable. In that case, then as an individual within the policies of the organization and then also the legislation of the country can be held accountable for that ultimate decision.
Dirk, any views there? Yeah, you can come in as well.
So there's a practical adoption thing here as well. If we as a business go in and say our systems is going to make the decision, what happens to the people that's in the business? So they're going to sabotage you. So that's again kind of self-regulating. So if there's not a role for the person to play, they're not going to help you understand what the problem is. So in the solutions we build, we use the machine to make the predictions around what decision can or should be made and what the expected outcome is. So the end user gets a list of scenarios that says this decision will lead to this outcome, and they can look at all of the things and they say, okay, I'm going to make this decision. So that's still down to the human, but they've got much more context at the point of decision making than they ever had before. That's the only way you can really get the technology adopted in the business as well. So all of our systems, and that's for us from a legal and a risk perspective as well, to say we will empower you to make the best possible decision that you can. Our only exception to that is our trading hedge fund, but that's our own money with our own problem. So we're fine with that one.
In law, we say volenti non fit in juria, voluntary acceptance of risk. Dirk, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think one will perhaps have to look at different cases as well. If you generally have the approach, I agree with Retief, that you empower people, that AI is used to augment human intelligence, and make you do your work in a better and more efficient way. I think that's a responsible way of dealing with it. Certainly, there are some AI applications that you can leave running, and the human oversight is very limited. A traffic regulatory system to make sure that the traffic flows are fine can run on its own and take decisions when traffic lights, the timing should be changed, etc. But if I use AI diagnostic system in a hospital, certainly I would like the doctor to take the final decision, better informed decision, but I would not rely on the AI MRI scan to do the final decision. So it depends on the context as well.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up my bit and then I'm going to hand you over to the audience. I know Marie's going to have some questions for us. I'm not going to silence you again, Marie. If I can ask each of you in turn, what do you think is the greatest, what excites you most about AI and what scares you most about AI? I'm going to be like that. Dirk, we start with you.
I think the exciting part is the innovation, the fact that there are so many new applications being developed on a daily basis that brings benefit to society. That is exciting. The scary part is those areas of application where the risk is potentially very high of negative impact on society. I mentioned earlier the issue of legal autonomous weapons. And use of AI in defense is a complex issue. It's not as simple to deal with, but it impacts society as well. And certainly we have to think more about the risk on a more practical level, issues of social media, where fake news, fake profiles, image cloning, voice cloning, etc., happens too frequently and as a potentially really damaging effect on specific individuals, but on society at large. That is certainly a lot of risk for us as society to deal with, and we should deal with it to put in proper guardrails.
So I think most, if not all, technologies that's come and big ones like AI has had on the whole, a positive impact on society. But it comes with a lot of change, and that big change, it does affect a lot of people in very real ways. And that part, I don't know where it's coming. And I think if people are not going to be able to adapt to it, it's going to be problematic. But on the whole, I'm still an optimist of everything that will happen.
Sure.
The most exciting thing, if we can get the AIs to do the stuff we don't want to do as human beings, I think that's fantastic. For me, that's the thing that bothers me the most. So I'm a bit into the AI alignment research, which is how do you ensure that the more sophisticated systems, let's say specifically your multi-agent agentic systems, remain aligned with the intention of the developers and remain aligned with also, let's call it human values, but obviously there isn't one catalog of human values. And they are picking up a little bit sort of concerning things. If you look at the stuff Google DeepMind is publishing, so deceptive alignment, so where the machine pretends to be aligned, misalignment, sort of explicit misalignment with the goals of the developers. A couple of other things there. So let's say the multi-agent agentic systems, the alignment problem really concerns me a lot. There's been a paper, there was a paper in Science, I mean, a really great journal, where the computer scientists who wrote this article argued that long-term planning agents, sort of exactly what it says, sort of things with a long-term planning horizon should actually be banned because there is no way that humans can provide oversight and pick up misalignment or deceptive alignment. So those things really bother me.
That is rather scary. Okay, so our audience, do you have anyone, you have questions for our esteemed panel? Ah.
So they're applied in various settings, but where you give them a long-term, let's say, optimize crop yield in this thing over the next 10 years, and the AI system needs to advise you on what to plant, when to water the stuff. I mean, people come and go, and we simply don't have the mental capability, the computing capacity in our minds to really keep track of what the machine's actually doing. Linked to that is the little bit of a scary thing called instrumental goals. So often these agentic systems develop instrumental goals where they realize my explicit aim is to pursue, let's say, maximizing crop yield over a longer term period. But then they realize that, not realize, I mean, they're not conscious, but that there are other, they do realize that there are other goals that they need to pursue in order for them to pursue that long-term goal. So the resource hoarding behaviors have been observed where they realize we need to get control of, let's say, power supply or other things like that. Or, I mean, it sounds like science fiction, so it's in a really controlled environment, but sort of resource hoarding or some other instrumental goals then develop where they actually sort of logically realize that they need to pursue certain goals in order for them to pursue that sort of ultimate goal that they were programmed for, let's say, optimizing crop yield.
To start managing or regulating what is coming, we create new regulatory. Take the example of our current conduct. Now, in themselves to guidelines to make control that area. Perhaps very principles of the application regulator. Yeah. So I'll just sort of, I'm not going to be able to do that justice, but in South Africa, we love us a good regulator. So every chance we get to get a new regulator. But Bradley, I think Dirk, this is more up your alley. You've been around the world with this stuff. What is the optimal legal framework? Do we patch what we have, or do we come and we put down a clean slate? Perhaps look at what's working in other parts of the world.
I think we should look at what's working well in other parts of the world. I would argue for a new focused legislation on AI, but clearly taking into account what other laws might impact on the development or use of AI, like POPI, for example. But there could be other legislation, for example, on copyright that one will have to look at and see how that interact with an AI piece of legislation. As far as the oversight body is concerned, it seems like the data protection authorities worldwide are expanding their authority to also include AI, and it seems to be a logical place to park that responsibility. I don't think there's sufficient reason to establish a new office only for AI. In Europe, they have done that, in special AI office. I'm not against it, but I don't think currently we have sufficient ground to do that. And then the role of codes of conduct, I think, is something worthwhile to explore in industries, but also generally, if you look at how the EU AI Act deals with that, to say, in certain cases, for limited risk, if you adopt a code of conduct of good ethical behavior dealing with AI, there's not so much obligation on you as a developer to comply with. You can stick to your code of conduct, and that would be adequate. So I think there's an important role to play, depending on how we deal with codes of conduct, And in particular, when it gets to the use of AI within a public sector context, there's certainly good code of conduct for use of AI could be useful because they're working with public money, public services. There's, in a sense, a higher expectation on officials to deal with it in a responsible way, and a code of conduct can help in that way.
Any other questions? Okay, so it seems like we're oddly all aligned to say that whatever side you consider it from, we need to build trust in these systems, that they work and that they can work to the betterment of whatever the outcome is we want to achieve. So if it's an academic context or whatever, using these systems responsibly will build trust in the technology and give us the efficiency gains that we want. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you to our panel. Yeah. Sorry, we have a question. I'm just going to paraphrase that very briefly. So you're asking essentially AI is trained on Reddit and all the conversations there, get really good at mimicking how people talk and engage. And if you were to use that in a deceptive way, does Retief see that as problematic? Okay, yeah. So it's not, you can't see it's a bot. It appears to be a human. And whether that's problematic or optimal.
So I think anything deceptive is going to get caught out. I think the benefit for us, and must always be careful with marketing material. They always say they're better than what they are. When you actually start using it, it's not that thing. So I'm not, in terms of how capable these things are mimicking humans in a context like that, we're not there yet. They're going to get better though. There are practical solutions for that. I think from a sales perspective, people trying to sell stuff is always going to be there. And that's part that's, I think, I don't know how the legislation can do with that, but you're going to get to a point where if there are machines capable of selling to you, you're going to get to a point where you don't have a chance to say no as a human anymore. But there's nothing that says that you can't have an agent on your behalf interacting with those agents with the sole responsibility of protecting you. And if it can get a better deal or something out of something legitimate, it's potentially better. But I think that's one of the problematic things with sales by machines is going to get so good that it's going to be very difficult to say no. This deceptive things get picked up very quickly, so I'm not too worried about that. And if someone asks us to do something like that, when it's deceptive, we won't take part because that doesn't last. They will sell quickly, they'll get a few things, but the message, the word of mouth still gets out. And there's still a clear differentiation between what's real word of mouth and what machines have created. So I'm not too worried now, but it's going to get better. But that's why I say I can see that I'm going to have an agent that will deal with that for me, and I wouldn't even have to deal with it. Because longer term, companies owning your data also has to change. So you're going to have an agent on your top of your data that can talk with them and see what do they need? When do they need it? What are they willing to pay for you to get it? Because I think with the legislation, risk of companies owning personal data is also just going to get too big. So that thing will change significantly over a long time. The capitalist in me says it's going to get pushed into the red, where it's going to get a breaking point and then swap over. I don't think the legislation is going to keep up with the bad actors there.
And even if the legislation was perfectly written, the enforcement is also a challenge. The policing, the courts are congested. So, I mean, we don't have to get into that. But even if you get that first task pristine, you're not out of the woods at all. Yeah. Yeah. No, go for it. So just to paraphrase, Marie wants to know if these machines talk Afrikaans to one another or gibberish.
So it's super practical. I don't expect them to ever go outside of natural language, because they have to agree amongst themselves which is the new way of communication or protocol that they're going to communicate with, and they'll never agree on the same one. So
there is this famous example of Meta Labs, the Fair Labs, where they got the machines to talk and they then adapted language. So
that's part of the deception. That wasn't. Yeah. That's not a real. It's not a real. It was demonstrated. It was pre-programmed to do that. It wasn't an automatic.
But that specific experiment, I think, is where they changed. I mean, they didn't become a new language, but they realized the way the English language functioned in that conversation wasn't optimal, and then they made it more optimal. You know, they're changing words or removing syllables and stuff.
Those aren't explicitly Those are explicitly programmed as part of a demonstration. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen naturally. So it is for the sake of creating a. I've seen the video. I've seen the done. Show me the code of where it didn't do it by explicitly programming it. That's a different story. So I think language is universal. The complexity of building a new protocol that they can communicate on and getting everyone to adopt that language works.
Yeah, so Bradley's asking if the agentic bot will go out and negotiate the best insurance for you and come back and say, well, I've now got this for you. If it can at that level negotiate, it's not just B2B contracting, it's negotiation between agentic beings, if you will.
Yeah, it's to some extent based on the premise that eventually I will be the custodian and owner of my data. So their AI won't have anything to do with. So they would have to ask me which is my which is my preference, based on my particulars, which is what is the best deal that's going to get me interested, not the other way around. So I do think data is going to move back to the owner, because that, if we're talking billions of years, if we may be still around, that it will become the most significant asset in terms of behavior, medical research, cures will all be based on the fact that I'm holding that data and it's too expensive for other businesses to exchange that. So if we just take one of the industries that they spend the most money on is trying to aggregate health data. The top ones, I think, is something of $50 billion have been spent on trying to build systems to keep health data together so we can come up with cures. I don't think it's ever going to work. It's going to be, but I am recording stuff all the time. If you have that and it's my ownership, then the bots can come and talk to my bot and see if they can do something that will make it better for me. That's how I see it. Yes, if the corporation can use it, then I can use it too. It will become cost effective to do that. So yeah.
But that's not how the technology works today. It works on pooled lakes of data, not decentralized pockets of data, right? If so, there would have to be a fundamental shift in the development of the tech so that it can reach into that pocket and get that access. Yeah. Yes, go for it. Maybe Dirk, you want to take that? Maybe I can just lead us in. We have a common law system which is always in the background ready to respond outside of legislation. And we have things on our books that I think can unexpectedly come to the fore. ECT Act, CPA, those sorts of, that can be triggered and actually have quite effective remedies, but completely unanticipated. Dirk, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. I agree with that. I don't think current legislation is sufficient to deal with the development of technology and impact of that. None of the laws were drafted at the time that AI was so prevalent and used, new applications being created daily. So one will have to bear that in mind. And if you then look at you as a user or consumer, one can explore what the Consumer Protection Act, for example, would allow you. But I think also there it is limited in scope and it was not designed to cater with AI applications. So that's why I say we need a focused legislation dealing with the technology itself.
Just add my comment, and I have no legal background. I'm not a lawyer. I don't talk to legislation. I think the fundamental question is who's the bad actor and what is it classified as? Because I think usually in law talks to a person did a bad thing and, you know, under these laws it's not allowed and this is the consequences of doing it. I think with AI is, and it takes it further, so none of the technologies that's available today can really be classified as a person because they can't really think. But, you know, on the question is the person who made the system create the hate speech the bad actor? Is the company that created it the bad actor? Is the company a bad actor because they didn't, their system was possible to be able to do that? Or was it because they didn't do, they weren't responsible in deploying it? So I think that's the question, like where, if you're going to blame someone, where's the finger going to go? I think an extension of existing laws that would cover some of these fringe cases, but I doubt specifically targeting AI with legislation is going to be effective because it's going to move too quickly. But I think generally bad is bad, good is good, and there should be consequences. I think that's across the board. It's just often legislation doesn't have a thing that says that thing was not there when we wrote it, so I don't know where to classify it as. I mean, we had a thing with foreign exchange, with the shareholder buying into the company with crypto. But in our exchange control, there's a thing that says rands. And if it's not rands, it doesn't count. So now we're in no man's land around what it is. So I think that's one word that's like a currency or something that can change. It's not a new law for crypto. It's just saying fix that little part of it that refers to a person, which is AI is not a person. I think that would cover it. But I'm still, bad is bad, good is good. The bad people should get what's coming to them. We just have to figure out who's in that scenario, who's actually the primary responsible, and I think that's where the lawyers would know where.
I love the innocence, Retief. It's really. Anything else, or shall we wrap up? Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to our panel. Thanks, guys. That was great. I could keep going, and maybe we can catch you on the flip side in season 4. But thank you so much. All of your inputs were very valuable.